All right, let's jump right in, Salem. What are we talking about today?
So today we're talking about what makes a house a home and the role that our home it plays in our relationships and parenting, in our careers, our work life, and then just how we blend and balance that all together.
I can't wait. I can't wait to dig in. I know obviously you are a very qualified person to really discuss this topic. Can you kind of give us the rundown as to what makes you qualified and what your background is and why we felt like this was really relevant for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an interior designer. I work for a general contractor who primarily specializes in residential remodeling. We do some new builds, but our main client is the client who's looking to remodel or renovate their current home or a new home that they've purchased. And so I get to see and work in people's homes all day, every day. And so I get to see what works for folks, what doesn't work, and I get to be involved in the process of helping those people make those spaces not only more beautiful but more functional for them and their needs and their family.
Yeah, I heard you say at the beginning of this, and I couldn't agree more, that there is a huge difference between a house and a home.
Right.
So walk me through what are those differences and what how does a house become a home for people?
Yeah. I mean, well, and let's talk about it because I mean, we all live somewhere. We are fortunate enough to live somewhere. And so if you just look up the definition of what is a home, the Merriam-Webster the dictionary is going to say that it's a place where one lives, a dwelling of some sort. But I also think about home in more of a general sense, especially thinking about like, let's just say the holidays. People say, I'm going home for the holidays. And that's could be more of like a general geographic area,
Mm,
even though they are definitely going to be going to someone's house, someone's home. But that's also how we use home in a sentence, when we're
yeah.
referring to like going back home, even though our own house is our home too. So I think about that. I think about a home doesn't have to be just a specific house. It could be an apartment. It could be a rented room. It could be anything that makes it, it's you that really makes it the home. Does that make sense,
It
Dustin?
does. Are there certain elements? Obviously, you have the physical space itself.
Right.
And what are the elements that I think what you're saying is defines it a little deeper of a connection or emotion when you're there to call it home?
Right. And I mean, I think what you just said is more specifically what makes it a home is that emotional connection that you have to it. Because a home or a house, let's just say house, um, has functions, like everyday functions.
Mhm.
So it's a shelter over our heads to keep us warm from the elements, keeps us out of the cold and the rain. It is a shelter. It is a place where we prepare food, where we prepare meals. It's a place where we eat those meals. It's a place where we sleep, where we bathe, and where we focus on our hygiene and, do our we can go as far as to say self-care routine, but where we bathe and then a lot of times we also work there and we relax there, for leisure, hobbies, et cetera, et cetera. So I put the work and the leisure at the bottom of the list because the first five, I guess you could say, are the main functions. It's a shelter, it's a place where we prepare food, we eat food, we sleep, and we bathe.
Mm. Yes, it's like the core elements of getting through living life.
Right, right. And so your house is the place where you do those functions. Um, but then what transforms it from this like strictly like functional place into a warm and inviting one and a place where we basically find refuge from the world. We return back to our homes every night, or hopefully we do, unless you're traveling for work or this or that. But in a general sense, you return home. And so there are so many things about that place that make it home. And so, it's your center, your hub. It's where you kind of operate from. You get ready there every day, you leave out and go into the world, and then you come back there. But it's where everything starts and ends. But it's also a place of comfort, a place of safety and security. And sometimes it can be tranquil and peaceful, and sometimes it can be chaotic, depending on what you've got going on in your household. But it's the place where we can just be ourselves. And those are the type of emotions and, some of the softer things that make your house a home.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's funny that you say that. I just want to say, like, I don't know if you've ever heard the term touch grass. Somebody on my team introduced me to
yeah.
that not too long ago, but it's really interesting because when I travel for work, because I do often travel, I don't like to take my socks off and go barefoot where I'm staying, or like even when I'm visiting other people's homes or
Yeah.
houses. But one of those, like, touching grass or grounding myself and being centered when I get back home is that I will walk barefoot. Even if my floor is not as clean as it should be, I am willing to walk barefoot in my home, but not someone else's house, or even like where I'm staying when I'm away. So I think that just, I know that that's like animating what this means to be home versus in a
No,
house.
no.
But
I think that's totally relatable. Yeah, it's funny that you
yeah,
mentioned touching grass. That's funny.
yeah. So
Um,
it's not grass in my house, but I touch my floors and with my
yeah,
feet. It's a grounding thing for me.
I
So
know, I know.
yes.
Grounding is this whole new, or maybe it's not really new, but I'm hearing about it more often as like the latest thing.
Oh, it's trending. Definitely trending. Um, but anyway, that is one of those moments that I get home and I'm just like, yes. But what would you say, recapping that just real quick, what separates a home from a house and creates this beauty in it, no matter what
Well,
it looks like?
so while I'm talking, think about, and I know this is supposed to be a quick recap, but think about, close your eyes, think about a house that you've been in and it wasn't yours, but you immediately felt like a sense of calm, a sense of relaxation, and that, like, even though it wasn't your house, you felt at home. Like it
Mm,
had this like beautiful warmth to it. And it wasn't necessarily like the temperature. It was like an emotional and like a spiritual warmth where it just kind of like embraced you when you walk through the door. I feel like we've all had an experience like that where we walked into someone else's home and immediately felt welcomed
hmm.
by it. Of course, it wasn't our own house, but it was somebody else's, and they've been able to recreate that and just welcome you in. And it was almost like you were coming home.
Yeah,
Can you think of a place?
I can. I can. I think I'm very comfortable when I come to your house in that sense. Um, my mammals was like that.
Mhm.
So yes, yes, I can. I think sometimes there's that connection of relationships that also creates that. So, and I know you're going to talk and touch on that a little bit. So, do you want to
Yeah.
kind of introduce that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think the other part of what makes a house a home isn't just like the aura of it or like the things in it. It's the people that live there.
Mm,
And that, of course, you have the relationship with the people that makes the place. And so, yeah, that's kind of like going into our next topic, talking about the relationships that we have and how that impacts this whole concept of home. And so at a very core level, when we're talking about home, you think about the relationship that you have with the other people that live in that home. And so a lot of times, I mean, I'm going to be talking from a place where I'm talking about my spouse, talking about my husband, and I'm talking about my child, because those are the people that live with me.
hmm.
And for other people, they could have multiple generations living in the same home. They could have like a blended family living in the same home, or you could be a totally different stage of life and have like a roommate who isn't necessarily directly related to you, but the two of you make the home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm just talking about those relationships. And so within our homes, we have shared spaces and then we have personal spaces. Now, and I know as moms, our personal space is limited, right?
Yes. Very limited.
But you're good with your boundaries, I think.
Yes, they're called walls. I'm just kidding. um, yes, I am a boundary person, but it's honestly to not protect people from me, but to protect myself. But yes,
Yeah,
we do have to have, I agree though, it's those personal spaces because relationships happen in a lot of places of the home,
hmm
but definitely have to have one space or another that's really just kind of like your own um,
right.
alone time space. So where's yours at?
Well, I mean, I'm not as great at the boundaries as you are, but I'm sitting in my space.
Mm,
Um, and yes, we worked hard to carve out this corner of this space to make it look presentable because Megan acknowledged that I'm a little bit of a hoarder. So I'm sure that'll come up in later episodes. But um, yeah, I'm in my space currently, which is my art studio.
yes, and I love it. It's definitely not a hoarder by definition. She has a great appreciation for all the things, which obviously I love. Um, so she shares that love with others when they come. We can see it.
Welcome.
Yay!
Welcome. Yeah, anyway, that's putting it nicely. But anyway, so let's talk about the shared spaces for a little bit. So the
Mm,
shared spaces in our home, I mean, that's where the relationships happen, right? We're not building relationships alone in our personal space. So um the relationships bloom and blossom and develop in those shared spaces. And so think about the spaces where you're all together. For me, at my house, it's the kitchen, and I think a lot of people that applies. Like, that's where all the people are. Everybody wants to be around the food and the cook, and you're all doing it together. Of course, for a while now, the open concept has been big, in terms of, like, spatial layouts in homes. So that makes it easy for everybody to be all in one space and all together. Because there was a time where the kitchen was walled off and you were kind of left alone in the kitchen. And, you know, several years ago, I mean, this has been a trend for a long, long time. Um, that you wanted to incorporate that. So now the living
mm,
space, the dining space, the kitchen, all of that is one big room, which has its advantages and disadvantages. And I think during the pandemic, we started to see a lot of people, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but started to see some people want those walls back up, because they were spending too much time together during the pandemic. And they were like, oh my goodness, got to get away. But anyway, neither here nor there, we're kind of getting off track here. But the it's in those shared spaces that the conversations happen. Your kids are coming home from school and you're asking them how their day was, you're helping with homework, you're doing this, you're doing that. Life is lived in those shared spaces.
mhm.
Um, and so that's where we come together, and that's where all those wonderful memories come from, is in those shared spaces.
As an interior designer, what are some of your quick tips or practical applications for those shared spaces in general? I don't think you have to be too specific to optimize the opportunity for relationships.
Well, I think in general, like, when we talk about when we talk about those shared spaces, is really, and some of this is going to be a personal type of response, not necessarily like a textbook interior designer response, but in those shared spaces, I like everything to feel cohesive, and just well blended. But I also like those spaces to be basically like primed for life, let's say,
Mm,
for example. And so what I mean by that is they're not cluttered with a bunch of stuff. I mean, even though, yes, I like to collect things, my main living space is pretty bare,
mhm.
in terms of, like, I don't have a lot of excess stuff. We have toys, of course. Who doesn't have toys in the living room? And so Harrison has his own little station in the living room where he knows he can go get his things. He knows where they are. But on the whole, we try to keep things very clean and not cluttered with junk and stuff. So that by default means you've got to have some really good storage solutions
Mm.
to house all the things. And so that's kind of like just very simple, very low budget, very basic level things that I like to have in those share spaces.
Yeah, I think it's important. One example that I thought of as you were explaining that is we have a smaller footprint house and our shared space is very much the kitchen. Like that is our hub. And instead of a dining room table or a kitchen table, we have a huge island. And so
Hmm.
that island does stay completely clutter free because that is where all of those conversations happen. How was your day? That's where homework happens. That's where the dinners and the meals happen, or even like the planning of what's happening the next day or the weekend, or getting things ready for soccer or school. So it made me think of that specific example, is wherever those shared spaces are, for to be clutter free and not have a lot of things on it, unless it's what you're presently working on in the moment.
Right, right. And as you were talking, it made me just, think when we keep things clutter free and keep all I'm going to call it junk, but just stuff, you can really focus without all of that extra clutter in the way and really
Mm.
be present for those conversations that you're talking about. Because I mean, not everybody's like me, but I get distracted by stuff. And if I've got a pile over here and a pile over there and just like a pile of laundry, it's just eating away at my anxiety. So I've got to get that stuff out of the way so I can really be present in the few hours that I do get with my son, because I do work all day. He's at school all day. So we just get a window in the
Hmm.
evenings together. So our mornings and our evenings are very important. And if I'm distracted by stuff, then that just takes away our time together and that time for building those
Okay.
relationships.
Well, controversy topic. This is a controversial topic.
Okay. Okay.
TV in the main bedroom. What, like, that's not stuff, but it's also where conversations happen between spouses. What is your thoughts on having a TV in the bedroom?
So, okay. So I have a TV in my bedroom. So let me say that first. I have one in there. And I know a lot of couples have one in there. Don't you have one in your bedroom?
I do. Hmm. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah. But we have some good friends who do not.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I haven't really talked to the husband much about this, but the wife, she swears by it and she will not budge. She says, absolutely not. We're not having a TV in the bedroom. And I think that is a wonderful thing.
Oh yeah.
And if I could talk my husband into it, we would do it, because by the time we're getting in bed, that's the time where we have conversations. And my husband and I were on, maybe you could reference back to our love languages or whatever. If the TV's on and I'm a quality time person slash words of affirmation person, the TV's on, that means you're not paying attention to me. And I need your full attention. Um, and so I just feel like, well, if you want to spend time together, then let's spend time together. And I'm going off
Hmm.
on tangent here, but yes, it is like a spicy topic because a lot of people are very passionate about their TV, and
Mm.
even talking about our shared spaces and that being a place where we build relationships. Some For a lot of folks, the TV's on from the time they get home to the time they go to bed, even if it's just for background noise. Maybe you're not watching a TV show and you're not locked in, but
Yeah.
you still have it on as part of the background. And so the TV is definitely a distraction. And depending on, I think, where you're at in terms of like parenting, the TV can be a hot topic in
Yeah.
general, regardless of whether it's in the bedroom or, so you're talking about screen time for your kids.
Yeah.
Um, but screen time for adults is just as big of a topic, because I mean, from a relationship standpoint, now that I'm a parent, we have less and less time together. So the little bit of time that we do have, I want that to be quality time. And so the TV can get in the way of that.
Well, I think you just segmented really well into what I wanted to ask about next, which is the parenting and like the design of a home, and not necessarily like having high design or what that looks like design wise, but really the function, like you were talking about, the layout. What role does that play in parenting for all of us moms, dads out there that are interested in that?
Absolutely. And so, ideally, we would all live in massive, luxurious homes where we have multiple rooms and spaces dedicated to all the things that our children need for learning and development, or what we might think they need for
Hmm.
learning and development. But I know that you have a personal story about this, but I mean, our children are where we are. And so we've got to
Yes.
really like build their spaces into our space. It's perfectly fine if you have a playroom. That playroom really only gets used if we have friends over. It doesn't get used on a regular basis, which is kind of interesting. I mean, so right now we converted. And so another thing that I'll talk about is kind of like having these convertible spaces that
Mm.
can function as multiple things. And so even for us, just as an example, we have a playroom. It used to be a bedroom, and before our remodel, it was like the formal living room. So it's had lots of names in its history. But right now it functions as a playroom, but we really don't go in there much, maybe a little bit on the weekends. But it really only gets used if we have company over.
Yeah.
So in terms of layout, it's really just incorporating their spaces in with the rest of the home. And so I feel like sometimes, if you're thinking about how can I make my home, just on trend, for example, or how can I do this? And you're on Instagram looking for inspiration, you see all of these beautiful, well designed, aesthetic homes on there. You don't see a single toy. Of course, nothing's out of place. They've curated it for Instagram. And you're thinking, how do they live there? Do they have children? Like, you're seeing all these beautiful things, but you're having a hard time applying them because you've got all this other stuff that has to somehow also fit in. Um, and so I just think being thoughtful and mindful, again, not over cluttering anything,
Hmm.
and just thoughtfully incorporating their things into all the spaces that you currently live in. And so, of course, we know that the home environment in general impacts children's like social and emotional development, and having like I'm going to say harmonious, but that's kind of like a really fluffy term. But just having a really like, yeah, like just a solid foundation for your, core values and beliefs. Like that's what's important for kids to grow up in, is just to have a really strong home life that enforces those values. So forget about the design. You know, that's at its core what our kids need. They need us to be there for them, and they need us to provide that type of positive environment. Um,
Hmm.
Now, I'm going to say all that and then also say I'm not a child expert. I have one child. And I know what I believe and what my values are. And those are the types of things that I try to make sure that we're doing in our house.
Yeah, I think it, once again, it also depends on the child, right? Like I have two, and they are opposite ends of the spectrum as far as even just their interest and how to nurture the development or interest that they have, so I've had to do things very differently for both of them. um I have, design aside, there you can always make something that's fun look somewhat cohesive with the rest of your space. But we have open shelving in our kitchen, and I have one daughter who's extremely artistic, and so we had, for the longest time, coloring pencils and markers and crowns on our kitchen shelving because it was easy access to give. And
Hmm.
so that's one practical use that you could you could like make it look like it's supposed to be there, even though it doesn't really, like, it's not kitchen. It worked, right?
Right. And
So
I'm
I
sure
think it is a matter.
you had it in a beautiful little container that
In a
matched your
sugar mold
decor. But yeah, I
that
mean,
I found.
yeah,
But yes, you're right. The sugar mold made it look like it actually kind of worked up there somehow or another. But yes, yeah, there's always practical ways. But that is one thing, I had to have really quick access to those things, whether it was when I'm cooking or I'm trying to help my older daughter with her homework. I'm like, okay, here's the colored pencils that sit on my kitchen shelf right beside the cookbooks or whatever I have up there. And, so their shared spaces have always been somewhere, because the big house, small house, they've always been where we are. And I agree with that.
right, right, absolutely. Yeah, because talk about that for a minute. You went from how many square feet to what are you at now?
Yes, we downsized from about 2,500 square feet, and we are now in 1,400 square feet. And so we had the playroom with all the spots and things that we had, the art station, we had the reading station, we had the innovation station, and none of those things got played with accurately. They actually all ended up being in each other's spaces if they got touched. And we eliminated that, and we really had to intentionally design our home now with spaces that are part of ours, but also in their bedrooms,
Mhm,
because there is no big playroom anymore. But it has worked really well, and honestly, we've grown closer. Like, they've grown closer as sisters, we've grown closer as a family. And that's because, once again, those shared spaces are a lot more intentional with what's
mhm,
in them and how we use them. So what
right.
you're
Plus,
saying tracks.
yeah. Well, and physically, just like in the space, you guys are closer.
Yeah.
You're,
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean, just
yes,
physically. And so,
literally,
in every sense of the word, you are closer.
literally. Yeah. Yeah.
No, but that's good because some people might be stressed about having to downsize and having a growing family and thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to kill each other. And really, for you, it's been the opposite. It's brought
hmm
you guys actually closer together.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So, oh,
there was another
go ahead.
space in our home that we gave up when we were downsizing, and I had a fully dedicated office space.
Mm.
Can you talk to us about workspaces or what that looks like? Because I know sometimes those are separate from these shared spaces, or even just like the parenting and being able to separate the parenting and the work and all of that.
Yeah. So, um, most of us work. I mean, some people may come from some sort of generational wealth situation where they don't have to or whatever, but most of us do work. And I think our society, to a certain extent, I think everybody, their work kind of leaches over into their home life. As much as we don't want that to happen, it leaches over in some way, shape, or form. But also, we're in this age of work where a lot of people work from home. We're still like post pandemic, or however you want to phrase that, or just want to acknowledge it's just over and let's not talk about it. But a lot of people changed the way that they work during that time, and they're still at home working. And so whether it's you're checking emails, just here or there, or you have like an actual office or a space where you have to actually perform work every day, in some way, shape, or form, our work is at home with us.
Mm,
And so when you're thinking about, let's just say in the situation where you do work from home in some capacity, maybe it's just one day a week, or maybe it's just a few hours here or there, like having a dedicated space for that work is very, very important. Um, and I'm speaking in generalities here because not everybody might. Some folks might not agree with me here, but I think it's important to keep work separate from your home life. Um, some people want to talk about work-life balance. Some people want to talk about work-life integration. Um, those are all kind of like buzzwords and hot topics. Even from my days in HR, like those conversations were happening about how to be, basically how to like improve your happiness around like balancing work and life in general. Um, and so being able to keep that work separate from the rest of your home, I think is very, very important. And maybe you don't necessarily have the space in your home to dedicate like a whole entire room to it to where you can shut it out. I mean, ideally, you'd be able to have an office, have a place where you can literally shut the door and walk away from it. But not everybody, that doesn't apply to everybody. Some people can't do that. But if you could have an area in your home, or maybe you have a home office in a bedroom that's not being used 100% all the time, maybe use that closet, even if you just put the desk in the closet and shut the
Mm,
doors, or have a curtain, or install like a fun barn door, or make it cute, because when you are working, you want to be able to be productive. But, and I work a lot better when things are, aesthetically pleasing and
me
organized.
too. Hmm.
And so I think a lot of people are like that. So make it cute. But even like something simple like that, like put it in the closet, renovate that closet, just that part. So you can have a separate office space that you can close off completely from your house. And so you can literally walk away from it and then go into those shared spaces and be present while you're with your family. And
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
that I think that's important. I think being able to really kind of close it off, whether you're physically closing it off or just mentally, I think being able to just hide it and get it out of sight is important.
I agree. And I think that if there's someone out there, so the last 3 years, I've not actually had a home office when we did downsize. And that was also an intentional decision because I am a bit of a workaholic. So if I even had the opportunity to go somewhere in my home that was dedicated to work, I would be there more often than not. And so I'm a recovering person in that sense. That's a recovery I've been taking a part in. And I'm hoping to get a workspace, not for work though, but more of like being able to work on other things. And now that my girls are getting older, having a space for us to work on their projects together and things like that. So I agree, you definitely have a workspace, but then it needs to be easy to like put up and turn off for the day, like have an on and off switch for it.
Yeah. And yeah, so when I say work, I'm talking about, like your work.
Hmm.
We can do
Yep.
there are all types of work that we could be doing, or all types of activities that we could be doing that we're going to call work. But when I'm, this part of the conversation, I'm talking about work in a, this is the kind of activity that we do for money. This is our activity for our career. This is where we go in and we report and we get stuff done, which is different from, work for fun or work for leisure, or, even like a hobby. So
Yeah.
I think when you're talking about some of those things, then I have a different opinion.
And we should have a whole conversation around that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
we only have a few minutes left to wrap these things up. So, can you give us a rundown um, of how you would package this in a little box? If you were saying, okay, here's my gift to you today, what does that look like? What does that sound like?
My little gift to you. Okay, so yeah, I think when you're thinking about home and our relationships, the home has so many functions. It has, our strictly functional things that are our everyday kind of, let's call them like a must-have, like basics, shelter, preparing food, eating food, sleeping, hygiene, all those things. But then it's also our hub and our emotional support system. That is also our home. It's a place where we're welcomed. It's a place where we are our in its purest form, like ourselves. We are truly ourselves at home. And so, as soon as you walk in the door, you should be able to just feel relief.
Mm,
Um, and that space, that what we're calling home, it impacts our entire lives. it impacts the relationships we have with the people that live there, but it also can impact the relationships that we have with others, the friends that we welcome into our home, our other family members that we welcome into our home. And then ultimately, our home impacts how we interact with the world. And we didn't really talk about that much, but I do believe that. Um, but then, transitioning from our relationships, making sure that we have those shared spaces to really celebrate one another and build relationships with one another. We have those personal spaces where we can decompress and kind of have like a little recovery time to ourselves. We didn't talk about that much either, but I do want to say that I think that alone time and that having this personal space, even if it's just a tiny corner, really make
Mhm.
a difference. I even worked for a client. It was actually my boss. We renovated his home, and but they sold their house and moved into another home. Anyway, so we renovated it for them, and his wife in the old house had a place that she called the mama space, and it was like it was an office, but it was like her place where she hid all the Christmas gifts. It was the place where she wrapped all gifts in general. She has a wonderful little ministry where she writes like handwritten notes and cards to people. So that's where she would do that, where she would read, and basically it was just a place where she would go hide. And so we had to make sure to incorporate a mama space in this new house. And they drastically downsized from a 3-story house to a 1-story, and it was really intense, but it was so important to her, we had to make sure that it was included. So, I mean, even like that, we had to have the mama space, which I thought was fantastic. And then of course, while I was doing that project, I was thinking, "Dang, I need a mama space." Um, because
Don't we
I mean,
all? We
yeah,
all need a mama space.
yeah, yeah. And it was so funny. I mean, even on the drawings, even on the floor plan, you put all the labels on the rooms. It was called Mama Space, and it just cracked
I
me
love
up.
that.
But anyway, so having those spaces where we build relationships and we interact with one another, but also having some private time and some alone time to rest and recharge. And then talking about how our home impacts how we parent and the spaces that we hold for our kids. We, of course, all of their things get incorporated into our home, or at least that's my philosophy. Some people want to keep it very, very separate. I've been in houses where where that's how the family operates. Toys stay in the room, they don't come out, or if they do come out, they get put back in the room before the end of the day or end of the night. And so, of course, you do whatever works for you and your family. But making sure that that children have a safe and secure place to grow and
Mhm.
develop. That's the biggest thing.
Okay, Salem, we only have a few minutes left in our day. So if you were to wrap all of this up that we just talked about into a gift to give everybody, what would that be?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we're talking about making our house a home and having it be a welcome space, not only for us, but also our children, for our friends and family, those that we welcome into our home, and also creating a place for us to work and to play and to learn and to grow and do all the things and somehow balance it all. And so, um, you know, we talked at the very beginning about what makes a house a home. We have all of its core functions, whether we're talking about, it providing shelter, preparing food, eating the food, sleeping, um, taking a shower, making sure that our hygiene is in check, all those essentials, but also being a place for our emotional center and hub. And ultimately, your home is the place where you can, at, I mean, very, very base, it's just where you can be yourself. You walk in and immediately can just let down your guard and be yourself. And it should function that way for your spouse and your children too. Um, kind of like that, your refuge from the world, where all of your anxieties can sort of just melt away when you walk in the door. That's what makes a house a home. And so of course you can achieve that by your decor and how well it's designed and all of those things. But at its core, it's just a place where you walk in the door and you can immediately be yourself. And so um, your home impacts your relationships in so many ways. You've got shared spaces where you build those relationships and make those memories, and then you have those personal spaces where you have your relationship with yourself. You can rest and relax and recharge in those personal spaces. And I know we've had this conversation before, but sometimes we just need to be alone and have those few minutes to ourselves. And I know for us, I mean, a lot of time that happens in the morning, but
Mm.
we're in that personal space, we're alone, and just have that time to recharge. And then, of course, our home impacts our children. It impacts their growth and development. And we want to make sure that our spaces kind of honor that, where they have a space to play, where they have a space to learn, where they have a space to rest. And sometimes it's important, we didn't really dig into this too much, but making sure that our decor choices and our design choices are um, suitable, let's say, for children, meaning they are durable, they're easy to clean, making sure you choose the right fabrics for things like that. But also make sure that children feel at home, they have a space that they can call their own, that honors them and their personalities. And I know you've talked about it in previous episodes, and we'll, I'm sure, continue to talk about it. Your girls' rooms are decorated specifically to honor their personalities, and I think that it's so
Mhm.
wonderful. And then, in today's time, so many people work from home in some capacity, whether it's just checking email or it's a entirely like work from home 100% fully remote situation. And so being able to keep that work versus your home and personal life separate, I think is very important for those relationships, and for your own personal mental health, right? It'd be great if we could all have like these perfect home offices that have, beautiful French doors and like tons of natural light, and they're well designed with this huge, perfect desk. Like not everybody has those privileges, I guess you could say, or have those opportunities. But just having a space where you can completely close it off, whether it's in a closet or it's in a small corner of a bedroom or whatever it is, being able to cut off that work so you can be fully present in your home life. Again, those relationships with the people that live there with you. And then ultimately just trying to balance it all, balancing the demands of the relationships, the parenting, and the careers. I think the biggest thing there is just making sure your priorities align with your values, and you're communicating with your partner or your spouse constantly about those, and making sure that you are helping each other stay in check on that. Because if you get off track on your priorities and they start to not align with your values, your core values and beliefs, you're going to feel off. Something's not going to feel right. You're going to feel overwhelmed. You're going to be anxious. It's just going to be too much. And you're going to think, well, what is it? So, just constantly kind of like level setting with yourself, making sure your priorities are in line. And I know you're a big one on this. We're not going to get into it because this is a summary, but, in order to create balance, sometimes you have to say no to things, and understanding where your boundaries are, I think is very important with that. And then the last thing I
We
think,
do.
create,
We need to talk about that, Salem. I'm interrupting you, and we're not going to talk about it tonight, but
yeah.
that is why this podcast is called We Need to Talk. We need to talk about saying no and what those boundaries are. And I can't wait to share all those things. But please, yes, continue, conclude. I'm so sorry.
No, 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 no. Because if you must know, Megan is so good at saying no. Just in general, she's really good about not letting her priorities become misaligned with her values. And that involves, for Megan, I'm not going to speak for you, Megan, but just understanding when she has to say no and knowing
Mm-hmm.
her limits. Maybe that's part of the conversation too. I know we'll have it, but knowing your limits, and so protecting yourself from getting
Mm-hmm.
to the edge. And a lot of times it involves saying no. I'm not as good as Megan is, so hopefully we're all going to learn something from that episode. Um, but yeah, and just, making sure that you don't ever forget that you and your spouse are a team and you're in it together. And so you both have to be um, on the same page when it comes to those things. And then the last thing I have for creating balance, sometimes we just need help. And so being okay with just asking for it. And I know you, Megan, I mean, every now and then you need help cleaning. I've done the same thing. You call in some help, even if it's once a
Correct.
quarter or whatever it is. Like sometimes you just need some help. And it could be as simple as hiring a cleaning person
Mm-hmm.
to just get something off your plate. So,
Yes, I love even talking about what help looks like in another episode too.
mhm.
Um, so I love that. We need to talk more.
I, I feel sure that we will. But yeah,
Awesome.
that's kind of like my quick, that was as quick as I could get it summary.
I loved it. I think if there's anything that we can take away, it's you're not alone out there. I'm not alone. Salem's not alone. And the idea of home being so important in this place that you can continue to come back to, because I've
Hmm.
always heard the saying like always
Yeah.
come home.
Yeah.
And this reminds me of that. And I hope everybody else was able to get one or two nuggets from it that felt that as well. And I think that's pretty much it for the day, huh?
Absolutely. I think so.
All
Went
right.
a little
Well,
bit longer than I thought it was going to.
and that's okay. Go listen. All right. Well, until next time.
See you later.